Right.
Sure.
So he took his own life like during the proceedings. Then must have been in in being held
Toward the end of the trial. Yeah. In fact, the trial might have been over at that point. They were just awaiting the verdicts, but he committed suicide.
Yeah. And then we have Kurt Frenzel here as well. So this is Bolender as well. So you can see happier times for Bolender. It did not end well for him. And this is Gottlieb Herring, who we spoke about last time, and some of the other Sobibor perpetrators. And we have Kurt Frenzel then. And this is, do you know which interview this is, Michael?
Not 100% sure. I'm trying to figure out who the party.
So this is, so eventually Kurt Frenzel's trying to get out, and he eventually does get out for the last 9 years of his life. But this is Tavia or Thomas Blatt. So this is thought to be, the only time that a victim, and Kurt Frenzel sent his family to the gas chambers as well. So that's why the interview was just such an incredible one. But Frenzel, by all accounts, he is, would you say, Michael, one of the true monsters of the Holocaust?
Yeah, his crimes are so monstrous and so just gratuitously cruel. His kinds of crimes are the ones that caused judges to boggle and to question whether such things could really have happened. As it turned out, they really did happen, but at the time they seemed to be so utterly beyond the pale of believability as to leave the judges just grasping for some way to interpret it.
Eric Bauer was a really important source of information. Like we said, he'd already been arrested, and he said of Frenzel, he was one of the worst and most brutal members of the permanent staff. His whip was very loose. Victims, as we've touched upon, very, very often, many times, picked Frenzel out as being just a sadistic and cruel monster. This Herschel Kuckerman said that Frenzel was a sadist and a killer without conscience. His involvement at Sobibor went much beyond the mass exterminations. He committed numerous other crimes as well. And I showed a picture of Esther Raab earlier. And one thing I was thinking that was interesting to me is, you were talking earlier about similarities between Chelmno and Sobibor, and you see these similarities. When I was writing my dissertation on Treblinka, probably two of the most shocking and appalling and sickening acts of violence that I found Treblinka perpetrators doing, Frenzel also did them, and that I found that quite jarring. So there's various different witnesses. He's actually convicted of this crime, whereas I think the court were very sympathetic and generous towards the perpetrators, and they were quite happy to throw out an accusation of a particular murder if they felt that there was holes in the testimony or it wasn't as robust as it should be. But this crime he was convicted of, and Esther Raab was one of the people that testified that she saw a small boy had been left behind in a railed car. Frenzel discovered the baby, seized it by the legs, and smashed its head with all his strength against the wall of the car. Raab saw the baby's head explode from impact, and she stood in court and she's recounted this. This had made her, as you would imagine, a great impression. It was like the manner in which she said it as well made a really strong impression on the judges. And this case is also corroborated by different witnesses. Margulies attested to several incidents in which Frenzel had killed children using the same technique of seizing their legs and then smashing their heads against the wall of a boxcar. And like I'll talk about maybe next week, this is something that Joseph Hurt tried to do. It's something that Kurt Frenzel did, and there's a part in my dissertation where I've noticed this same method of killing popping up again and again over space and time. It's obviously just one of those incomprehensible acts, isn't it, Michael?
And according to the Jewish witnesses, the murders of infants and young children were routine in the camp. Routine. If not daily, then an almost daily, certainly weekly occurrence in the camp.
Yeah, you wonder just, and that's something I don't think I'll ever be able to comprehend, like how they could become, how other humans could become so desensitized from a very advanced civilization. How these people, like many of them, had police backgrounds as well. How they, and children, like I've mentioned, he's got 5 kids. How you could look at someone else's kid and just so barbarously murder them without a second thought.
My friend, this is why we study this topic as intensively as we do.
And like I said, another thing that really, I spoke about this in the podcast that me, you, and Brett had, where I was reading through crimes that had been committed at Treblinka, and one of them just stopped me in my tracks. Although you read so many of these, they're all just sickening and appalling. But it's the murder of somebody that's attempted suicide. I don't know why that has such a elicits such a visceral reaction from me, but it always does. Do you know what I mean? Like somebody's just attempted.
There are multiple cases of this. There's not just one, but multiple. And I think it elicits from you a reaction of compassion, because much like a young child, or maybe an elderly person who is really ailing, and a person who is trying to commit suicide is just so vulnerable, right? It's so fragile. And in civilized society, people would respond to that person with compassion and with care, right? I think that's that'd be the normal empathic human response to such a situation, but not in the death camp. In the death camp,
No.
You respond to these people by continuing to inflict torture on them and then killing them yourself. How dare they arrogate to themselves the right to take their own lives? Only the SS can determine who lives and who dies, right? That's the clear ideology, clear dogma lurking behind this this cruelty.
And it's, if you consider that Bolender committed suicide, these people that are trying to commit suicide in the death camp and these perpetrators, it's qualitatively just a complete different thing, isn't it? The suicide of a perpetrator, because they've been busted and they've been convicted of the most appalling crimes. It's almost like quite a cowardly act, trying to escape justice. But one of the things that is so impactful about people committing suicide in this killing center is just thinking about what has driven them to that point. They really are, in some sense, unfortunately, party to the killing process, and maybe that's driven them, but they've just, the things that they've seen and they've heard, and they've decided that they just can't bear any more of this torture, of this suffering, of this torment. The suffering is almost too much to comprehend, isn't it?
The impulse to suicide is understandable here, isn't it? I mean, imagine being in this kind of Tartarian atmosphere. It's hell, right? It is like a glimpse of what hell would be like if such a place existed. Children, infants being smashed against the side of the wall, their heads exploding. Children being torn to pieces. There were some witnesses who testified that Frenzel tore infants apart, limb from limb, and in some cases in front of their mothers. I mean, in such an and of course, you have the Damoclean sword of your own imminent murder hanging over your head if you're a warp Jew, for example. You always have that sword hanging over your head, ready to fall on you at any point.
Yeah, you wonder how people, it's just kept going.
Johnny, you would expect that everybody would try to commit suicide under those circumstances. Yeah. I mean, I cannot even imagine what that would do to the human psyche.
Yeah. But you do have incredibly people like Thomas Blatt who do survive, and I think he dedicated his life to relaying the truth of Sobibor, one of the great historians of the Sobibor killing center. But
That's right.
his survival is just, the odds are impossible.
It's phenomenal. It's an extraordinary thing. And the fact that so many of these people were willing to come back, not just in this trial, but in other trials too, including the Eichmann trial, of course.
And to sit across the table from this monster, and
Testify.
the interviews there, the transcripts there, if you want, and Frenzel's just making excuses for himself and just saying that he's repentant, that he was once a Nazi and that he's not political anymore. Basically, can't believe that he got swept along with this, but really he was murdering people far, far above his orders.
None of this matters, right? All that matters is what he did during his time in the camp. That's all that matters.
And so this person that tried to commit suicide at roll call, Frenzel had him brought out and berated in front of other prisoners, and got his whip out and berated him and whipped him as he was dying, and then dispatched him with his pistol for, like you say, for thinking that he had the right to take his own life. So just a truly sickening individual, and it's hard to take that he spent the last 9, due to essentially on compassionate grounds, he's released.
Yeah.
And he spends the last 9 years of his life a free man, which is just
think about it, Johnny.
Incredible.
If he was truly penitent, right? Claims that he had turned over a new leaf or whatever. I'm not buying any of it, by the way, but if that were truly the case, then he would ask for punishment.
Yeah.
He would say, yes, what I did was what was monstrous. It was of a degree of wickedness that cries out for severe punishment, and I'm ready to take my medicine. I'm ready to pay the price for these horrendous things that I did. But of course, he didn't say that at trial, did he?
No, and for someone to do what he did in the first place, somebody with his character would never do such a thing. I don't think I've heard of any cases of perpetrators saying, lock me up and throw away the key because what I did was just so appalling.
No.
But it doesn't surprise me that these people do not just try and sneak and lie and deceive and slither themselves to freedom.
It's a vivid image. Slithering.
Okay, right. Just a couple of interesting things about the trial then for us to reflect on.